English friends. They even didn't know that we were deported to Russia.
You didn't want to tell them because they wouldn't understand, or they would laugh, so you just close yourself up.
West didn't want to know because the priority was to win the war, regardless of the price. You cannot blame them for that.
It would be fair for the Polish people who suffered so much to say that what was done was very wrong.
It's a history, it's important. One shouldn't hide the truth.
The Victory Parade in London. Britain celebrates the end of 6 years of horrific war. Polish soldiers who fought alongside their British and American allies are not invited to take part in the parade.
Victory Parade, Victory Parade, we didn't treat it as a Victory Parade. Of course, I don't even think that we are so much offended that Poles were not invited. At that time I was in Scotland, and it was not a victory for us.
Churchill said in the House of Commons, "The fate of Poland seems to be an unending tragedy, and we, who went to war all ill-prepared on her behalf, watch with sorrow the strange outcome of our endeavours." The strange outcome of the war, as Churchill put it, was that Polish troops and their families had no homes to go back to. They had to build up their lives anew, scattered around the world, over 110,000 people making their home in Britain. However, the reasons for this displacement are known in the West only to a very few. Not many people know that just 5 years earlier, most of the recruits to the Polish army were emaciated, exhausted, and bedraggled, like General Rakowski, the future hero of the Battle for Monte Cassino. This is the story of their forgotten Odyssey. September the 1st, 1939, is known as the day of Hitler's attack on Poland, the day that triggered off the Second World War. The date September the 17th, 1939, is not so well remembered in the West. It was then that Poland suffered another blow. Soviet Russia, her other neighbor, attacked her unexpectedly from the east. This was a direct result of the secret protocol attached to the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, in which Germany and Russia divided Poland between themselves, to all intents and purposes, forever. Having occupied half of the Polish territory, the Soviets sought systematically to eliminate the Polish nation. To crush possible resistance, they arrested all the Polish officers they could find, whether serving or in reserve. At one stroke, Stalin was destroying the flower of Polish intelligentsia, professors, scientists, doctors, and artists. The Soviets now turned to the officers' families and the rest of the middle classes, as well as shop owners and landowners. Soon even whole villages were arrested for refusing to accept Soviet citizenship. No one was spared. All were taken and given just half an hour to pack their possessions. Halina Żywuszko was 13.
My sister had flu and they came to take us away. My mother was begging them to let her stay behind. She was worried about her. But the Russians didn't want to hear.
Around 1.7 million inhabitants of eastern Poland, not only Poles but also Jews, Belarusians and Ukrainians, were deported to the depths of Russia, into the unknown. Their only crime? They were Polish citizens. Janina Jorkiewicz, then 13, vividly remembers leaving Poland.
It was only at the station that we saw the full extent of the tragedy of our people. There were several sets of goods trains. Voices, questions and shouts were coming from inside. After some time the train started and there was a great outpouring of the hymn, "We will not abandon our land," coming from all the trains. Everyone was crying, everyone was singing.
Wydobywał się z wszystkich pociągów. Wszyscy płakali, wszyscy śpiewali.
conditions in the train were inhuman.
Just normal cattle train, 60 to 70 people were pushed into one compartment. Of course, there were no beds. In the middle of that wagon, there was cast iron stove, and that's all what there was. There was no toilet. There was one opening little hole.
Anna Moszczynska was then a 21-year-old.
In the first week, they didn't even open the wagon. At once, you lost all your sense of dignity. You became cattle, because all the physical needs had to be dealt with in front of other people. Only after a week, they threw us a bucket of some gruel.
10-year-old Janina Kwiatkowska's journey started tragically.
On the way, my grandmother died. They threw her out into a ditch, and the train went on.
Majority of the people started working in gold mining pits. In the pit called Yuzhna, where you used to work in water. They supplied you sort of the rubber overalls and gave you, regardless of your age or sex, gave you a glass of very strong vodka before you went there. Conditions were really, really harsh. I was working one of those as a 14-year boy, nearly 1,000 feet below the ground. So were the pregnant women, so were my mother.
My mother died of meningitis. She was 32, and we were left alone for 6 long years. The two of us lived in a mud hut, and when it was raining, we were wet. When there was frost, we were freezing. When it snowed, sometimes we were completely buried, like in a grave, and then our neighbors, people of goodwill, would dig us out. There were times when for 3 to 4 days we had nothing to eat, because there was nothing to eat. When spring came, we stole whatever we could. We collected animal bones in the steppe, but there were few animals, because people ate most of them. I learned to sit by the holes of steppe rats, and when a rat was coming out, catch it by its tail, kill it, and eat it. I find it difficult to believe that all this is true, but it is the truth. Nothing but the truth.
Aniela Novak was deported at the age of 10.
For 2 years we have no doctors. It was people who didn't have a proper nutrition, and there was cold. So many people died in that camp. Probably half of the people died.
Aniela's teenage brother died in a Russian hospital. Their mother went to recover his body.
She could see many bodies, and she recognized my brother. And she said that he was naked, and his tears were just frozen on his body. She took the body, and with my brother they travel all night and probably a day to bring him home, and then my father has to dig the tomb and grave in this very hard earth, and that's where my brother is, my eldest brother.
Following the Soviet amnesty, the Polish authorities carried out a census, which located only 1/3 of the estimated 1.7 million deportees. What was also strange and worrying was that not one of the 22,000 officers arrested in 1939 could be found. In April 1943, the advancing Germans announced the discovery of a mass grave in the Katyn forest near Smolensk. 5,000 bodies found in a ditch were missing officers, shot in the back of the head, their hands bound with wire, lying in layer beyond layer beneath the earth. The Soviets were outraged at Poland's request for an independent investigation by the International Red Cross. Accusing the Poles of aiding Goebbels' propaganda, Stalin broke off diplomatic relations with Poland. From now on, Poland's fate was in the hands of her British and American allies. But it was a delicate matter. The Soviets were now a new, badly needed ally of the West, and they could not be antagonized. Sir Owen O'Malley, the British ambassador to the Polish government, convinced Churchill and the Foreign Office that the responsibility for the Katyn massacre lay with the Soviets. And yet, despite the convincing evidence presented in his secret report, it was decided to bury the issue, for all intents and purposes, forever. Eden told the cabinet, "I did my best to persuade the Poles to treat the Katyn issue as German propaganda against the Allied war effort."
There can be no doubt at all that during the war, a number of people in the highest political circles in the United Kingdom were fully aware of the facts about Katyn and the Soviet deportations and other horrors. And a decision was made deliberately to mislead the public about those things. I think it's very difficult for people after 50 or 60 years to say, not that I made a mistake, but that our government was covering up the essential facts of history.
Then in 1942, General Anders persuaded Churchill to obtain Stalin's permission to let the Polish army leave the Soviet Union. Along with the troops, a number of soldiers' families were allowed out.
Put us to the on the train which was going to Krasnodar. After 2 years over there, you couldn't be, you don't believe that you could be free. I knew that we are going to Persia, but will we go to Persia or will we land in Siberia?
By August 1942, 118,000 troops and 44,000 civilians had left the Soviet Union in 3 large convoys, to freedom, to Persia. They crossed the Caspian Sea in overcrowded Soviet tankers.
Standing room only for men, for army, for civilian population, families, was cramped right to the brim. People were sick, they had diarrhea, there were no toilet facilities, no water to drink, no food to have, but everybody was happy. Going away with the Soviet Union disappearing behind the Blue Sea. We were staying that night on the beach in Barley, and I remember extremely well that I deliberately stripped myself completely naked, and like St. John, I washed with the water just to get rid of all this miasma of Russia. That was wonderful time.
Those fortunate enough to escape the Soviet Union were received by the Persians with warmth and kindness. Immediate and practical help was provided by the soldiers of the British, Indian and American armies awaiting them on the Pahlavi beaches. In November 1943, the Big Three met in Tehran. It was here that Churchill and Roosevelt gave in to Stalin's demand that eastern Poland, the territory acquired by an act of aggression in September 1939, would become officially recognized as Soviet.
Churchill and Roosevelt in effect handed over the entire area to Stalin on the plate.
This decision was reached without the knowledge or participation of the Polish government.
The Atlantic Charter, which nobody ever refers to now, but in that battleship, which after was the declaration by Churchill and Roosevelt, later on signed not only by de Gaulle but also by Stalin himself, said at the end of this war there would be no transfers of territory except with the freely given consent of the majority of the population. The Atlantic Charter was just forgotten.
Nobody believed in it. You see, that will be the end. You see, everybody went over there because Lvov and Vilna, which were 2 most famous towns, that was our goal, you see, that we have to fight.
Refusing to believe that they were no longer struggling for their own homes, Polish troops continued to fight alongside the Allies in France, Belgium, Holland and Italy. more than 47,000 Polish troops lost their lives on the battlefields of Western Europe. For those still stranded in the Soviet Union, the fight to survive continued.